The execution was supposed to be simple. She knelt in the mud of the rogue camp center circle, hands bound behind her back with iron chains that burned against her skin, and watched the rogue king pace before her like death-given form. 200 outcast wolves surrounded them in a ring of violence and anticipation, their eyes gleaming with the kind of hunger that came from living outside civilization's rules. "Your father," the rogue king said, his voice carrying across the assembled rogues with effortless authority, "is Alpha Matthias of the Ironwood Pack. The male who orchestrated the systematic slaughter of my family. Who burned my territory and salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. Who put a bounty on my head that still stands 5 years later." She said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like begging, and she'd learned young that begging never saved anyone in her father's world. "You were sent into neutral territory as a peace envoy," the rogue king continued, circling her slowly. "Unarmed. Unguarded. Practically gift-wrapped for anyone with a grudge against Ironwood Pack to claim." He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Tell me, did your father send you here hoping I'd kill you? Or was he simply stupid enough to think I wouldn't recognize his daughter on sight?" The question hit like a blade between her ribs because she'd been asking herself the same thing for the 3 days she'd been held captive. Her father had called it a diplomatic mission. A chance to prove herself useful to the pack that had never quite known what to do with its alpha's human daughter. She believed him because the alternative, that he'd sent her to die, was too horrific to contemplate. She met the rogue king's eyes and saw death looking back at her. He was massive, easily a head taller than her father, with the kind of build that came from surviving years of combat and hardship. Scars covered his bare arms and chest. And his dark hair was pulled back in a style that made the harsh angles of his face look even more predatory. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her, golden and utterly merciless, the eyes of a wolf who'd lost everything and rebuilt himself from rage and revenge. "I'll make it quick," he said, almost gently. "More mercy than your father showed my sister when he..." He stopped mid-sentence, his entire body going rigid. The scent hit him the same moment it hit her, jasmine and night-blooming flowers and something ancient that made the air between them crackle with power. The mate bond slammed into place with the force of a falling star. She gasped as golden light exploded behind her eyes, as every cell in her body suddenly recognized the male standing before her as hers. The bond wrapped around her heart like a fist, demanding acknowledgement, screaming that this wolf, this enemy, this killer, this male who'd been seconds from executing her, was her fated match. The rogue king's expression transformed from cold execution to absolute horror. "No," he said, the word torn from him like a wound. "No. This is not possible." But the bond didn't care about possibility. It blazed between them, undeniable and absolute, witnessed by 200 rogues who'd gone utterly silent. She saw the war happening behind his eyes, instinct screaming at him to claim his mate, to protect her, to fall to his knees and thank the moon goddess for the gift. And rage, bitter and corrosive, that his fated mate was the daughter of the male who'd destroyed everything he loved. "You can't be," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anyone but you." The rejection, when it came, was delivered with surgical precision. "I, king of the rogue clans, reject you as my mate. I reject this bond. I reject everything the moon goddess thinks she's giving me, because I would rather die alone than be bound to the blood of my enemy." The pain was immediate and catastrophic, like something vital being ripped from her chest while she was still conscious enough to feel every tearing nerve. She doubled over, gasping, the chains cutting into her wrists as her body tried to curl around the agony. Through the bond that was simultaneously forming and dying, she felt his pain mirror hers, the rejection hurting him just as badly because that's what happened when you tried to sever a fated connection. It destroyed both parties equally. But he stood tall despite the agony etched across his face, despite the blood that began to drip from his nose as his wolf howled in protest inside him. "Kill her," he ordered, his voice rough with pain. "Make it quick. I don't want her to suffer more than necessary." She looked up at him through tears she refused to let fall, and felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking, but awakening. Because hidden beneath the human exterior her father's pack had always dismissed, buried so deep she'd never known it existed, was power that had been waiting 20 years for the right catalyst. Rejection, it turned out, was an excellent catalyst. The question wasn't whether she would die here in the mud. The question was whether anyone would recognize what she truly was before they tried to execute her, and what that recognition would cost them all. The rogue clans were formed from the broken pieces of packs destroyed by territorial expansion and political consolidation. Wolves who'd lost everything, territory, family, pack bonds, and survived by banding together under the leadership of the strongest among them. The current rogue king had claimed his position 5 years ago after the Ironwood Pack, led by Alpha Matthias, had launched a coordinated assault on his family's territory. The attack had been brutal and comprehensive: warriors slaughtered, the pack house burned, civilians given no quarter. The future rogue king had been away on a hunting trip with his younger sister. They'd returned to find their entire pack reduced to ash and corpses. His sister hadn't survived the grief. She'd walked into the river 3 months later and never came back out. He'd spent the following years gathering every displaced wolf, every exile, every rogue who'd been cast out or escaped from tyrannical packs. He'd built them into a force that raided supply lines, disrupted territorial expansions, and made themselves into a constant thorn in the side of the established pack hierarchy. Ironwood Pack considered him a terrorist. The rogue clans called him their salvation. She had grown up in Ironwood Pack knowing her father was a monster but never understanding the full extent of his cruelty. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father had raised her with cold efficiency, never quite able to hide his disappointment that his only child was human. No wolf, no useful abilities, nothing but a political liability he couldn't quite bring himself to eliminate. She'd spent 20 years trying to be useful enough to justify her existence. Serving as a mediator in pack disputes because her lack of wolf made her seem neutral. Learning diplomacy and negotiation because those were skills that didn't require supernatural strength. Accepting every dangerous assignment her father gave her because maybe, eventually, he'd look at her with something other than thinly veiled contempt. The diplomatic mission to neutral territory had been her latest attempt to prove her worth. She was supposed to meet with representatives from smaller packs to discuss trade agreements and non-aggression pacts, work her father considered beneath his attention but necessary for maintaining Ironwood's regional dominance. She'd suspected it was a test. Possibly a punishment for some perceived failure. She'd never imagined it was an execution order delivered through calculated negligence. But standing in the rogue king's camp, feeling the mate bond dying between them while her father's greatest enemy ordered her death, the truth crystallized with brutal clarity. Her father had known exactly what would happen when he sent his human daughter into territory where rogues operated freely. He'd counted on it. What he hadn't counted on, what no one could have anticipated, was that she wasn't entirely human after all. The dreams had started 6 months ago. Visions of silver moonlight and ancient forests, of wolves larger than any modern shifter, of power that made the earth tremble and the sky weep with joy. She dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations, the mind's way of coping with a life spent feeling inadequate and invisible. But as she knelt in the mud with a rejected mate bond tearing her apart from the inside, she felt that dream power stir in her chest. Recognized it not as fantasy but as memory, genetic memory passed down through bloodlines so old that most modern wolves had forgotten they ever existed. Her mother hadn't been human. Her mother had been something the established packs thought they'd eradicated a century ago. And if she could just survive the next few minutes, she might live long enough to understand what that meant. The rogue who approached her with a blade drawn looked almost apologetic. Executions were common in the rogue camps, but mate bond rejections were rare and disturbing even to wolves who'd abandoned most civilized conventions. She closed her eyes and reached for that stirring power in her chest. Please, she thought to whatever ancient thing lived in her blood. If you're real, if you're more than just a dream, I need you now. The power answered with a surge that felt like coming home. The silver light that erupted from her body sent the executioner flying backward into 3 other rogues with enough force to crack ribs. She felt the iron chains around her wrists shatter like glass. Felt strength flood into muscles that had never been strong before. Felt her senses expand until she could hear heartbeats and smell fear and see in perfect clarity despite the darkness that had fallen over the camp. The transformation wasn't a shift, her body remained human in form. But power radiated from her skin in waves of silver luminescence that made every wolf in the camp back away instinctively, their beasts recognizing something their human minds couldn't quite process. The rogue king moved faster than thought, closing the distance between them and grabbing her throat with one hand. Not squeezing, not yet, just holding her in place while his golden eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What are you?" he demanded. "I don't know," she gasped out honestly, because the power flooding through her was as foreign as it was intoxicating. "I swear I didn't know this was possible." "You're not human." It wasn't a question. "I thought I was." The silver light pulsed brighter, responding to her racing heartbeat. "My father told me I was human. The pack healers confirmed it. I've never been able to shift, never showed any wolf characteristics." "Then what the hell is this?" He gestured at the light emanating from her skin, at the shattered chains, at the unconscious rogues who'd been thrown aside by her power surge. "I don't know." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, frustration and fear making her voice crack. "But I'm guessing my father lied about more than just the diplomatic mission." The rogue king's hand tightened fractionally on her throat, not enough to cut off air but enough to remind her exactly how precarious her position was. Through the dying mate bond, still present despite his rejection, still connecting them with threads of gold and pain, she felt his conflict. His wolf was going absolutely feral inside him, howling that this was their mate, that her power only made her more perfect. A fraction of a second where he almost wavered. Then his expression hardened back into cold fury. "Chain her," he ordered, releasing her throat and stepping back. "Silver this time, whatever she is, silver should still suppress it. Lock her in the holding cells until I decide what to do with her." "And the bond?" the elderly female asked carefully. "Remains damaged but intact," he said flatly. "Since apparently I don't get a choice in that either." The rogues moved in with silver chains that burned when they touched her skin, making her gasp and the silver light dim. They hauled her toward a structure built into the hillside, reinforced, windowless, designed to hold wolves who couldn't be trusted to roam free. As they locked her in a cell barely large enough to lie down in, she heard the rogue king's voice carrying across the camp, "Double the patrols. If Ironwood discovers we have his daughter, he'll either come to retrieve her or send assassins to make sure she never talks. Either way, I want to know the moment anyone approaches our borders." The cell door slammed shut, leaving her in darkness with silver chains burning her wrists and a mate bond that pulsed with pain and potential in equal measure. She'd survived the execution. Barely. But she had a feeling that surviving what came next, learning what she truly was, navigating a bond with a male who hated her bloodline, and somehow staying alive long enough to matter, would be infinitely harder. The silver light flickered weakly beneath her skin, dampened by the chains but not extinguished. Whatever power had awakened inside her wasn't giving up. The question was whether she was brave enough, or foolish enough, to embrace it. The cell was approximately 6 feet by 8 feet, carved into solid rock, with a heavy iron door reinforced with silver inlay. No windows. No light except what filtered through the narrow gap under the door. The silver chains dampened her newfound power to a whisper. But she could still feel it there, waiting, coiled like a spring beneath her consciousness. She spent the first night cataloging everything she knew about her situation, which wasn't much. Her father had sent her to die. That much was certain now. The rogue king was her fated mate, which should have been impossible given that she'd spent 20 years believing she was human. And she possessed some kind of power that manifested as silver light and could shatter iron chains, power that the elderly rogue had seemed to recognize even if she herself didn't understand it. The pieces didn't fit together. Not yet. But she was alive, which meant she had time to figure out the puzzle. On the second day, the elderly female who'd spoken during her near execution brought food and water. She slid the tray through a slot in the door, then surprised her by settling down just outside the cell, her back against the wall. "You should eat," the female said. "Whatever you are, you still need sustenance." She approached the tray warily, half expecting poison. But the food was simple and unadorned, dried meat, bread, water. Prison rations, but not execution rations. "What do you want?" she asked. "To understand what I saw," the female replied honestly. "I'm old enough to remember stories about wolves who carried ancient bloodlines. Powers that modern shifters no longer possess because the genetics have been diluted over centuries of interbreeding." She ate slowly, listening. "There were rumors," the female continued, "about a bloodline that carried the moon goddess's direct blessing. Wolves who could channel lunar power itself, whose abilities went beyond simple shifting and strength. They were called the lunar-born, and they were hunted to extinction over a century ago because the established packs feared their power." "Lunar-born," she repeated, testing the words. They resonated in her chest, recognition without full understanding. Or so the histories claim. But genetics are tricky things. Recessive traits can hide for generations before manifesting again. "You think I'm lunar-born?" "I think the silver light you manifested is exactly how the old stories described their power. I think your lack of normal wolf abilities was actually suppression, the lunar-born bloodline overwhelming your ordinary shifter genetics until neither could fully express." The female paused. "And I think your father knew. Or suspected. Which is why he sent you to die before you could awaken and become a threat to his authority." The analysis was brutal and made too much sense. "If that's true," she said quietly, "then my mother must have carried the bloodline. She died in childbirth. My father never talked about her." "Convenient," the female said dryly. "Dead mothers can't confirm or deny stories." She finished the food in silence, her mind racing. If she truly was lunar-born, if that's what the power inside her represented, then she was more than just Ironwood Pack's human disappointment. She was potentially one of the most powerful wolves alive, carrying genetics that were supposed to be extinct. No wonder her father had wanted her dead. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why help me understand?" The female stood, her joints creaking with age. "Because the Rogue King is going to have to make a decision about you soon. And the more you understand about what you are, the better chance you have of surviving that decision." He rejected the bond. "He tried to reject the bond," the female corrected. "But his wolf is already fighting him. I've been watching him for 2 days, he's barely sleeping, barely eating, and he keeps walking past this building like his beast is trying to drag him to your cell. The mate bond doesn't care about blood feuds or revenge. It only cares about connection. That doesn't mean he'll choose me over his hatred of my father." "No," the female agreed. "It doesn't. Which is why you need to decide what you want. If he offers you life in exchange for information about Ironwood Pack's defenses, will you betray your father to survive? If he decides to ransom you back to Ironwood, will you go quietly? Or are you going to fight for your own agency regardless of what either male wants?" The questions struck like arrows, each one hitting a different part of her heart. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then figure it out," the female said. "Because time is running out. Ironwood will have noticed you're missing by now. The Rogue King will have to act soon, one way or another." She left, her footsteps fading into the distance. Alone in the darkness, she pressed her hand to her chest where the mate bond pulsed with damaged golden light. Through the connection, she could feel the Rogue King's turmoil, his wolf howling for its mate, his human consciousness locked in a war between instinct and revenge. She'd spent 20 years being powerless, being invisible, being the disappointing human daughter of a pack that never wanted her. That version of herself had died the moment the silver light awakened. What rose in its place was a female who'd been given 2 impossible choices: embrace a bond with her father's greatest enemy, or return to the pack that had sent her to die. She chose neither. Instead, she reached for the power the silver chains were suppressing and began to test its limits. If she was truly lunar-born, if she carried genetics that were supposed to be extinct, then maybe, just maybe, she could forge a third option. One where she didn't have to choose between 2 males who saw her as either a pawn or a prize. One where she became powerful enough to make her own choices and force the world to respect them. The silver light flickered beneath her skin, responding to her determination. She had no idea how to use this power properly. But she was going to learn. And when she did, everyone who'd underestimated her, her father, the Rogue King, every wolf who'd ever dismissed her as weak would understand exactly what a mistake they'd made. The silver chains dampened her power but couldn't eliminate it completely. Over the following days, she learned to work within those constraints, to channel the lunar-born abilities through the suppression the way water finds cracks in stone. It started with small things. Making the silver light pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat despite the chain's interference. Sensing the wolves who passed by her cell, their emotions bleeding through in colors and scents she'd never been able to perceive before. Reaching out through the damaged mate bond to brush against the rogue king's consciousness before he slammed his mental shields closed. Each tiny victory taught her something new about what she was capable of. On the 5th day of her captivity, the rogue king finally came to her cell. She felt him approaching long before the door opened, his presence like a storm front moving across her awareness, all violence and controlled fury wrapped around the mate bond that kept trying to pull them together. The door swung open, and he filled the frame with his size and dominance. He'd clearly been in a fight recently, fresh cuts marked his knuckles, and there was blood on his shirt that probably wasn't his own. "On your feet," he commanded. She stood slowly, the chains limiting her movement but not her dignity. The silver light beneath her skin pulsed once, responding to his proximity, and she saw his jaw tighten with recognition. "I need information," he said without preamble. "Ironwood Pack's patrol schedules, supply routes, weak points in their defense. You're going to give them to me." "Why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is remaining in this cell until you starve or go mad, whichever comes first." His golden eyes bored into hers with predatory focus. "Your father sent you to die. You owe him nothing. Give me what I need to hurt him, and I'll consider letting you live." The offer was exactly what the elderly rogue had predicted. Survival in exchange for betrayal. "No," she said simply. His expression darkened. "You're choosing your father over your own life? The male who used you as disposable bait?" "I'm not choosing him," she corrected. "I'm refusing to help you slaughter pack members who had nothing to do with what happened to your family. Ironwood warriors follow orders. Most of them probably don't even know the full story of what my father did to your pack." "They were there," he snarled. "They burned my home and killed my people." "Did they? Or did a strike force of my father's most loyal enforcers do the actual killing while the rest of the pack was told it was a justified defensive action?" She took a step closer despite the chains, despite the danger radiating from him. "You want revenge against my father? Fine. I'll help you with that. But I won't help you commit the same kind of indiscriminate slaughter that destroyed your family." The rogue king stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "You're defending them," he said slowly. "The pack that made you feel worthless your entire life. I'm defending innocent wolves from becoming collateral damage in a blood feud." She met his eyes steadily. "If you want to be better than my father, then be better. Target him specifically. Dismantle his authority. Expose his crimes to the pack so they turn against him. But don't murder them wholesale just because it's easier than precision. You have no idea what you're asking." "I'm asking you to be the leader your rogues think you are," she said quietly. "The male who built something from nothing, who protected wolves everyone else had abandoned. That male wouldn't perpetuate the cycle of violence. He'd break it." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant consideration. The mate bond pulsed between them, carrying emotions he was trying desperately to suppress: frustration, grudging respect, and underneath it all, the howling need his wolf felt toward its fated mate. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "Neither are you." He laughed, sharp and without humor. "You don't know me. I know you rejected our bond because you thought I was just another version of my father. I know you're fighting your wolf every moment to maintain that rejection. And I know," she gestured at her still intact body, "that you haven't killed me despite having every justification. That says something about who you are beneath the revenge. It says I'm a fool who can't kill his own mate even when she carries the blood of his enemy. Or it says you're strong enough to see past blood ties to the actual person in front of you." The silence that followed was heavy with tension and possibility. Finally, the rogue king stepped back. I'm moving you to different quarters. Still guarded, but less. He gestured at the cramped cell, barbaric. You'll have space to move, access to books, better food. Why? Because keeping you in a hole in the ground makes me feel like your father, he said bluntly. And I refuse to become what I hate. It was the closest thing to compromise she'd heard from him. The chains? She asked, lifting her bound wrists. Stay on until I'm certain you won't use your power to escape or harm my rogues. His eyes held hers. Prove you can be trusted, and we'll discuss removing them. It wasn't freedom. But it was better than the cell. What about the bond? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His expression shuddered. The bond remains damaged and rejected. Don't mistake mercy for acceptance. The words stung, but she'd expected them. The rogue king wasn't ready to face what the mate bond meant, might never be ready, given the blood between their families. But she could feel his wolf through their connection, could sense the beast raging against his human consciousness's decision. And she knew from her limited understanding of wolf nature that when instinct and reason warred within a shifter, instinct eventually won. She just had to survive long enough for that war to reach its conclusion. He led her out of the cell and through the rogue camp to a small wooden structure on the outskirts. It had a real bed, a window with bars, a desk and chair. Prison still, but comfortable prison. Don't make me regret this, he said from the doorway. I won't. He left without another word, but she felt his presence linger nearby, his wolf refusing to stray far from its mate despite his human side's best efforts. She sat on the bed and pressed her hand to the mate bond in her chest. The damage from his rejection pulsed like an open wound, but beneath it, the golden thread still connected them. Still sang with potential and promise and the absolute certainty that they were meant for each other. She just had to figure out how to heal the bond while simultaneously learning to use powers she didn't understand, navigating a blood feud she'd inherited, and somehow staying alive in a camp full of wolves who had every reason to hate her. Simple. The silver light flickered beneath the chains, and she smiled despite everything. She'd survived this long against worse odds. What was a little cosmic destiny compared to 20 years of being unwanted? The elderly rogue's name was Vera, and she became her unlikely teacher over the following weeks. Vera brought books about ancient bloodlines, scrolls that detailed the lunar-born and their abilities, and stories passed down through generations about wolves who'd channeled the moon goddess's power directly. Most of it read like mythology, exaggerated tales meant to inspire or rather than provide practical instruction. But scattered throughout the legends were pieces of real information. Lunar-born wolves didn't shift the way normal wolves did. Their power manifested as direct energy manipulation, the silver light she discovered, which could be shaped into shields, weapons, healing energy, or pure concussive force. They could sense pack bonds from incredible distances and manipulate those bonds if they chose, though doing so was considered a violation of free will and the mark of a tyrant. Their greatest strength was also their greatest curse. They felt emotions more intensely than ordinary wolves. Joy was ecstatic. Grief was devastating. And the mate bond, when a lunar-born found their fated match, was supposed to be so powerful it bordered on obsession. That's why your father feared you, Vera said during one lesson. If you'd awakened while still in Ironwood Pack, your power would have been undeniable. He couldn't have kept you suppressed and controlled. You would have become a threat to his authority simply by existing. So he sent me away to be killed by his enemies, she said bitterly. Efficient. Monstrous, Vera corrected. But typical of males who value power over family. She practiced channeling her abilities within the constraints of the silver chains, learning to work with smaller amounts of energy and direct it more precisely. The chains prevented large-scale power surges, but she could still create a shield the size of her palm, could still send a pulse of energy strong enough to knock over a chair, could still sense the emotional states of wolves within a 50-foot radius. It wasn't enough to fight her way out of the camp. But it was progress. The Rogue King visited her new quarters occasionally, always finding excuses, checking on the security, ensuring she had adequate supplies, discussing neutral topics like weather and hunting conditions. But she could feel the real reason through their damaged bond. his wolf was forcing him to maintain contact, to verify his mate was safe and cared for, despite his human consciousness's bitter resistance. "You're fighting a losing battle," she told him during one visit. "Your wolf isn't going to accept the rejection forever." "My wolf doesn't get a vote," he replied coldly. "That's not how wolf nature works, and you know it." He leaned against the doorframe, his golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What would you have me do? Embrace the bond? Claim you as my mate and pretend your father didn't slaughter my family?" "I'd have you acknowledge that I'm not my father," she said quietly. "That punishing me for his crimes makes you just as unjust as he is. You carry his blood. And you carry the blood of whoever ruled your pack before the massacre. Does that make you responsible for every decision your ancestors made?" She stood, moving closer despite the danger in his posture. "We're not our fathers. We get to choose who we become." Idealistic nonsense. Truth you're afraid to face. The mate bond flared between them, heat and hunger and desperate need crashing against the walls he'd built to keep it contained. She saw the moment his control wavered, saw his eyes darken and his breathing change as instinct briefly overpowered reason. Then he turned and left without another word, practically fleeing the small building. She smiled despite the ache in her chest. Every visit, he lasted a little less time before his wolf forced him to retreat. Every conversation, his arguments against the bond grew weaker. The war inside him was reaching its breaking point. She just had to make sure she was strong enough to weather whatever happened when it finally broke. On the 43rd day of her captivity, Vera brought news that changed everything. "There's been communication from Ironwood Pack," she said, her expression grim. "Your father wants to negotiate your return." Ice flooded her veins. "Return?" "He's offering trade concessions and safe passage agreements in exchange for your safe delivery to neutral territory." Vera's eyes held hers. "The Rogue King is considering it." Of course he was. Returning her to her father would solve multiple problems, remove the uncomfortable mate bond situation, gain valuable concessions for the rogue clans, and hurt Ironwood's alpha by forcing him to publicly admit his daughter had been captured. "When does he decide?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Council meeting tonight. He'll make the announcement afterward." She had hours. Maybe less. The moment Vera left, she reached for the silver light and began pushing against the chain suppression with every ounce of will she possessed. The power responded sluggishly at first, dampened by the silver. But as she poured more focus into it, more desperation, the light began to grow. Not enough to shatter the chains yet, but close. She thought about her father's cold eyes, about 20 years of being told she was worthless, about being sent to die because her existence was inconvenient. She thought about returning to Ironwood Pack, about living under her father's authority again, about going back to being invisible and powerless. And she thought about the mate bond, damaged and rejected but still connecting her to a male who made her feel seen for the first time in her life, even if he hated her bloodline. The silver light exploded. The chains shattered, pieces of silver flying across the room. Power flooded through her in a torrent that made her gasp, no longer suppressed, no longer contained. She felt invincible and terrified in equal measure. Alarms began blaring immediately. The chains had been enchanted to alert the camp if they broke. She had minutes before guards arrived. Not enough time to escape. But enough time to make a choice. She could run, use her newfound power to fight her way out of the camp and disappear into the wilderness. Or she could stay and prove to the Rogue King that she was worth more than whatever concessions her father was offering. The door burst open. The Rogue King stood there with a dozen warriors at his back. All of them armed and ready for a fight. She stood in the center of the room, silver light pulsing around her like a living thing, broken chains at her feet, and met his shocked gaze with absolute certainty. "I'm not going back to Ironwood," she said clearly. "And you're not sending me. We're going to figure this out, the bond, the blood feud, everything, because I'm tired of being used as a pawn in other people's wars." The Rogue King stared at her like he'd never seen her before. And through the bond, she felt his wolf surge forward with triumphant recognition. "She's fighting for us. She's choosing us. The question was whether he was strong enough to choose her back. Stay to discover what happens when a rogue king finally stops running from his fate. The standoff lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the rogue king raised his hand, stopping the warriors from advancing. His eyes never left hers, taking in the silver light that now pulsed freely around her, the shattered chains, the absolute defiance in her stance. "Clear the building," he ordered. "I'll handle this." "Alpha, she's clearly dangerous," one of the warriors protested. "I said clear the building." The command carried enough dominance to make every rogue immediately comply, though several cast worried glances back as they retreated. The door closed, leaving them alone. The mate bond blazed between them, no longer dampened by silver, no longer held at arm's length by either of them. She felt the full force of his wolf's desperation, its absolute certainty that this female was theirs, that rejecting her was wrong on a cellular level that transcended revenge or blood feuds. And she felt his human consciousness still fighting, still clinging to hatred of her father even as every instinct screamed at him to claim his mate. "You broke suppression-grade silver chains," he said finally. "That shouldn't be possible for a wolf who only awakened 6 weeks ago." "I'm lunar-born," she replied simply. "Apparently we're overachievers." "Vera told you." "She told me what I am. What my father tried to hide. What you're too stubborn to accept." She let the silver light pulse brighter, demonstrating control she'd spent weeks developing. "I'm not weak. I'm not helpless. And I'm not going back to Ironwood Pack to be executed for surviving your rejection. Your father's offering significant concessions." "My father wants me dead," she interrupted. "The negotiation is theater. He's hoping you'll either kill me yourself or send me back so he can quietly eliminate me before I become a political problem. Either outcome serves him." The rogue king's jaw tightened. "You're certain?" "I've spent 20 years reading his political calculations. Trust me, I know how his mind works." She took a step closer, the silver light flickering around her like fireflies. "You want revenge against him? Keeping me alive and powerful is the worst thing you could do to him. It makes his greatest shame, the daughter he couldn't control, into an active threat to his authority. And what do you want?" The question came out rougher than he probably intended. "Beyond just survival?" The honest answer lodged in her throat for a moment before she found the courage to speak it. "I want to understand this bond that you rejected but can't quite sever. I want to learn what it means to be lunar-born from wolves who won't suppress or fear me. I want to build something that isn't defined by my father's cruelty or your revenge." She met his eyes steadily. "And I want you to look at me and see me, not Ironwood's cast-off, not your enemy's daughter, but the female the moon goddess chose for you." The vulnerability in admitting that made her want to retreat, to hide behind sarcasm or anger. But she held her ground. The rogue king closed the distance between them in 2 strides, moving with predatory purpose that made her heart race. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the war still raging in his golden eyes. "I tried to reject you," he said quietly, dangerously. "Tried to hate you on principle. Tried to see only your father when I looked at you. I know. It's not working." The admission sounded like it was torn from him. "Every day you're here, my wolf gets stronger. More insistent. More certain that you're ours regardless of the blood between our families. What does your human side say? That I'm a fool for wanting what I can't have." His hand came up, hovering near her face without quite touching. "That claiming you would dishonor my sister's memory and spit on my pack's graves. Or," she said softly, "claiming me would prove that love and fate are stronger than violence and revenge. That the cycle can be broken. That 2 wolves from enemy bloodlines can choose each other despite their father's crimes. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying and complicated and possibly doomed." She finally reached up and took his hand, pressing it against her cheek despite the risk. "But it's real. This bond, this connection, it's the most real thing I've ever felt." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the touch gentle despite the violence she knew he was capable of. "Through the bond," she felt his resolve crumbling, felt his wolf pushing forward with demands that could no longer be denied. "If I claim you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's no going back. The entire region will know the Rogue King is mated to Ironwood's daughter. Your father will consider it the ultimate betrayal. Other packs will question my judgment. Some of my own rogues might leave rather than accept you. I know. And you still want this?" "I want you," she corrected. "Everything else is just logistics." He laughed, the sound startled and genuine. Then his expression turned serious again, almost reverent. "I can't promise to forget what your father did. Can't promise the revenge drive will just disappear because we're mated." "I'm not asking you to forget or forgive," she said. "I'm asking you to separate me from his crimes. To judge me based on my choices, not his. And if I accept the bond, truly accept it, what will you choose? If I go after your father, will you fight beside me or against me?" The question cut to the heart of her divided loyalty. "I'll fight beside you," she said after a long moment. "But only if we're targeting him specifically, not the innocent wolves under his command. Precision over massacre. Justice over revenge. That's a tall order. You're the Rogue King. If anyone can pull off impossible tasks, it's you." He stared at her for a long moment, his wolf and his human consciousness finally reaching some kind of accord in the depths of his eyes. Then he leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, the gesture intimate and claiming and absolutely decisive. "I accept the bond," he whispered against her skin. "I accept you. And I accept whatever consequences come from choosing my mate over my vendetta." The bond snapped fully into place with a surge of golden light that joined with her silver, creating something entirely new, a connection that blazed with power and promise and absolute certainty. She gasped as his emotions flooded through the bond, love fierce enough to burn, protectiveness that bordered on obsessive, and underneath it all, relief so profound it made her chest ache. He'd been fighting this for weeks, denying what every fiber of his being knew to be true. And now, finally, he'd stopped running. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like surrender and victory and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw that Vera had been right about one thing: the lunar-born mate bond was intense enough to border on obsession. She could feel him everywhere, his heartbeat syncing with hers. His wolf twining around her power like they were meant to move together, his emotions as clear as if they were her own. "We're going to have to tell the rogues," he said eventually, though he made no move to let her go. "They're not going to take this well." "Some of them will leave," she agreed. "Let them. You don't need wolves who can't see past bloodlines. Practical and ruthless. I'm starting to understand why your father feared you." "He should fear me," she said, letting the silver light pulse once. "Because now I have a mate who's powerful enough to help me become everything I'm meant to be. And when I finally face him again, he's going to understand exactly what he threw away." The Rogue King's smile was sharp and dangerous and full of savage devotion. "Then let's make sure you're ready for that confrontation." What she didn't know was that her father had already heard about the broken chains, and what came next would test their new bond in ways neither of them could imagine. The Rogue Council meeting was exactly as hostile as she'd anticipated. She stood beside the Rogue King in the central gathering space, silver light flickering beneath her skin like a warning, and faced 40 wolves who looked at her with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hatred. "You're claiming the daughter of our greatest enemy as your mate," one of the senior rogues said flatly. "The same daughter you rejected 6 weeks ago. Explain." "The mate bond doesn't care about politics or blood feuds," the Rogue King replied, his hand finding hers in a gesture of solidarity. "The moon goddess chose her for me. I tried to fight it. I failed." "So you're putting your personal desires above the good of the clans," another rogue accused. "Ironwood Pack sent her here to die. Now you're keeping her as a pet?" The silver light flared dangerously, and several rogues stepped back instinctively. "I'm no one's pet," she said coldly. "And if you think accepting this bond was about desire over duty, you're not paying attention. I'm lunar-born, one of the most powerful bloodlines that's ever existed." The Rogue King didn't claim a weakness. He claimed the strongest ally he could possibly have. Lunar-born is a myth, someone started. She raised her hand and let the power flow. Silver light erupted from her palm, coalescing into a shield that shimmered with energy. Then she shifted it into a blade, then into pure light that illuminated the entire gathering space like artificial moonlight. "Still think it's a myth?" she asked quietly. The silence was gratifying. Vera stepped forward from the crowd. "I've been researching her abilities for weeks. She's genuine lunar-born, the genetics are unmistakable. If developed properly, she could heal wounds that would kill normal wolves, could sense enemies from miles away, could strengthen pack bonds or shatter them entirely." "That last part is what terrifies me," an older rogue muttered. "A wolf who can manipulate bonds is a wolf who can enslave us all." "I won't," she said firmly. "Bond manipulation is considered tyranny among lunar-born. I'll use my abilities to heal and protect, not control." "You say that now. But power corrupts." "Then watch me," she interrupted. "Judge me based on my actions, not your fears. I've been here 6 weeks. Have I tried to manipulate anyone? Have I tried to escape or harm the rogues? Or have I stayed, learned, and worked toward understanding what I am?" The female rogue who'd spoken looked uncomfortable but didn't argue further. "Some of you will leave," the rogue king said, addressing the council directly. "I understand that. If you can't accept my mate, I won't force you to stay. But understand this, she's proven herself more valuable in 6 weeks than some wolves prove in years. Her father sent her to die because he feared her potential. I'm choosing to embrace that potential and use it to make the clan stronger. And when Ironwood comes for her," someone asked. "Because they will come. Either to retrieve her or eliminate her." "Let them try," she said, and meant it. "I'm not the helpless human daughter my father discarded anymore. I'm lunar-born, mated to the rogue king, and anyone who comes for me will learn very quickly that I'm not easy prey." The rogue king's hand tightened on hers, approval radiating through their bond. Over the next hour, they fielded questions and challenges. 7 rogues announced they were leaving, unable to reconcile loyalty to their king with acceptance of Ironwood's daughter. She felt a pang at each departure but understood it. Trust had to be earned, especially from wolves who'd been betrayed by their original packs. The rest agreed to a trial period. They'd judge her based on her actions over the coming months. If she proved herself trustworthy and useful, they'd accept the bond. If she showed any sign of betrayal or tyranny, they'd demand she be exiled or executed. It was the best outcome they could hope for. As the council dispersed, Vera approached with a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to the last known lunar-born," she said, handing it over. "Died 93 years ago, but she kept detailed notes on training methods and ability development. It should help you learn faster than trial and error." She took the journal with trembling hands, feeling the weight of history in the aged leather. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Vera said dryly. "Half of those techniques will probably try to kill you before you master them. Lunar-born abilities are powerful but dangerous to develop. I'll be careful." "No you won't," the rogue king interjected, his tone knowing. "You'll push yourself too hard and I'll have to stop you from burning out. It's apparently part of the mate bond package." She elbowed him lightly, earning a rare smile. That night, alone in his private quarters, which were now their quarters, strange as that felt, she opened the journal and began to read. The lunar-born who'd written it had been named Celine. She'd spent her life trying to rebuild trust between her bloodline and ordinary wolves after generations of tyranny by her ancestors. Her notes were meticulous: energy manipulation techniques, healing protocols, bond sensing exercises, and warnings about the dangers of overextending lunar abilities. "Channeling too much power too quickly will burn out your connection to the moon goddess," one entry read. "The light must flow through you, not from you. You are a vessel, not the source. Remember this or die trying to be both." Sobering advice. The rogue king watched her read from his position by the window, his presence a comfort even when he was silent. "What are you thinking?" she asked after several minutes of quiet. That I nearly killed the most important person in my life because I was too stubborn to see past revenge, he said honestly. That the moon goddess has a twisted sense of humor giving me a mate I tried to reject. And that despite everything, despite the blood feud and the impossible politics, I wouldn't change this bond even if I could. She set the journal aside and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her cheek against his chest. I tried to hate you, she admitted. When you rejected the bond, when you looked at me like I was nothing but my father's legacy. I wanted to hurt you the way you'd hurt me. Why didn't you? Because even through the pain, I could feel your wolf. Could sense that you were fighting yourself as much as you were fighting me. She looked up at him. And because I've spent 20 years being invisible and powerless. I'm done wasting time on negative emotions. I'd rather build something new than tear down what little I have. He kissed her forehead, the gesture tender. Then let's build together. Train your abilities. Strengthen the clans. And when we're ready, when you're ready, we'll deal with your father. You mean we'll make him pay for what he did to both of us? That too. They stood together in comfortable silence, the mate bond humming between them like a promise, and she felt something settle in her chest that she'd never experienced before. Peace. Purpose. Belonging. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. And when the inevitable confrontation with her father came, she wouldn't be the helpless daughter he'd discarded. She'd be lunar-born, mated to a rogue king, and powerful enough to reshape the very world that had tried to destroy them both. The silver light pulsed beneath her skin in agreement. Let the training begin. 3 months of intensive training transformed her from a wolf with raw power into something that made even experienced warriors nervous. Vera taught her the theoretical aspects, bond manipulation ethics, energy conservation techniques, the history of why lunar-born had been hunted to extinction. The journal from Celine provided practical exercises that pushed her to the edge of burnout and back again. And the Rogue King became her sparring partner, teaching her to channel power in combat situations while his wolf kept hers grounded and stable. She learned to create shields that could deflect projectiles, to send pulses of energy precise enough to disarm without killing, to sense pack bonds from 3 miles away and read the emotional states of entire groups simultaneously. The healing abilities came slowest. They required a delicate touch she was still developing, but she could now close minor wounds and ease pain with concentrated effort. But the most valuable skill was something none of her teachers had anticipated: she could strengthen damaged bonds. The first time happened accidentally. One of the younger rogues had been struggling with a fraying connection to the clans, his wolf pulling away from pack instincts after years of trauma and isolation. She'd touched his shoulder during a training session and instinctively sent a pulse of silver light through their connection. The rogue's eyes had gone wide as his bond stabilized, the fraying threads weaving back together into something strong and secure. Word spread quickly. Within a week, she had a line of rogues requesting bond healing, each one carrying damage from rejection, exile, or the violent loss of their original packs. She helped every single one. You're going to exhaust yourself, the Rogue King warned after she'd healed her 9th bond in 2 days. They need this, she replied, too tired to argue properly. Most of them have been suffering for years. If I can fix it, why wouldn't I? Because you're not invincible, and pushing yourself this hard will burn you out. He pulled her into his arms despite her protest. You're allowed to rest. To be something other than a walking miracle for desperate wolves. She sagged against him, finally admitting how drained she felt. I just want to help. I know. It's one of the things I love about you. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But help yourself first. Strong boundaries, remember? She nodded against his chest, letting his steady heartbeat calm her racing thoughts. The bond between them had grown impossibly strong over the past 3 months. She could feel his emotions even when they were miles apart, could sense when he was in danger or stressed or thinking about her. And he could do the same. More than once he'd appeared at her side without being summoned, drawn by her distress through their connection. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like safety. On the first day of the 4th month, a scout reported movement on their southern border. Not rogues or wildlife, a formal delegation carrying Ironwood Pack's banner. Her father had finally come calling. The entire camp mobilized instantly, warriors taking defensive positions while the Rogue King gathered his core council. She stood at his side. Silver light already pulsing beneath her skin in anticipation of conflict. 3 wolves, the scout reported. Beta rank at minimum, all heavily armed. They're carrying a white flag but also enough weapons to fight their way out if negotiations go wrong. What do they want? The Rogue King asked. To speak with the Rogue King and the female claiming to be Ironwood's daughter. The scout's expression was carefully neutral. They were very specific about wanting to see you both. She felt ice flood her veins. Her father was testing whether she was truly here, truly alive, truly mated to his greatest enemy. We meet them at the border, she said before the Rogue King could speak. Neutral ground, enough witnesses that neither side can claim foul play. Agreed. He turned to his beta. Assemble a security detail. 20 of our best. If Ironwood tries anything, I want overwhelming force ready to respond. They met the delegation 2 hours later at the edge of Rogue territory, where the forest opened into a clearing that had been used for negotiations before. The Ironwood wolves stood in formation, 2 males and 1 female, all of them radiating the kind of controlled violence that came from elite combat training. The female stepped forward, her eyes finding hers immediately. You're alive. Disappointed, she replied coolly. Surprised. The female's gaze shifted to the Rogue King, taking in their proximity and the obvious bond between them. The rumors are true, then. Ironwood's human daughter mated to the Rogue King. I'm not human, she corrected, letting the silver light flare briefly. And I'm not Ironwood's anything anymore. I'm lunar-born, mated to the male your alpha tried to have killed by sending me into Rogue territory. The female's expression didn't change, but she saw the shock register in the wolves behind her. Your father wants to negotiate your return, the female said carefully. My father wants me dead, she replied bluntly. Let's not pretend this is about family reconciliation. He's prepared to offer substantial concessions. I don't care what he's offering. She took a step forward, silver light pulsing around her like a warning. I'm not going back. I'm not interested in his excuses or his political theater. You can return to Ironwood and tell him that his greatest shame is thriving exactly where he sent her to die. The Rogue King's hand found hers, their bond singing with unified purpose. Furthermore, he added, his voice carrying absolute authority, inform Alpha Matthias that his daughter is under my protection now. Any attempt to harm her, retrieve her, or interfere with her life will be considered an act of war against the Rogue clans. We're not interested in his concessions or his negotiations. We're interested in being left alone. The female delegate's jaw tightened. Alpha Matthias won't accept this. Then he'll learn to live with disappointment, she said. The same way I learned to live with having a father who valued his pride more than his daughter's life. For the first time, she saw emotion flicker across the delegate's face, something that looked almost like sympathy. I'll deliver your message, the female said finally. But I should warn you, Alpha Matthias has been consolidating power among the Eastern territories. He's building alliances, strengthening his position. If he decides you're enough of a threat, he won't just send delegates. Let him send warriors, the Rogue King replied. We'll be ready. The delegation departed, and she watched them disappear into the forest with a strange mixture of relief and dread. He'll come, she said quietly. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. He can't let this stand, his daughter rejecting him, mated to his enemy, powerful enough to be a legitimate threat. Good, the Rogue King said, surprising her. I've been patient long enough. If he wants a war, we'll give him one. But this time, we'll be fighting on our terms. She looked up at him, seeing the predator beneath the leader, and felt her own rage stir in response. Her father had sent her to die. Had lied about her heritage. Had suppressed her power and made her feel worthless for 20 years. Maybe it was time to show him exactly what he'd created. The war came faster than expected. 6 weeks after the delegation's visit, scouts reported troop movements along 3 borders simultaneously. Ironwood Pack wasn't just sending a strike force, they were launching a coordinated assault meant to crush the rogue clans entirely. They've allied with the Nightshade and Crescent Moon packs, the Rogue King's beta reported during the emergency council meeting. Combined forces of over 300 warriors, all battle-hardened and well-supplied. They're planning to hit us from multiple directions and overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers. Classic Matthias strategy, she muttered. Overwhelming force instead of tactical precision. Can we hold? Vera asked pragmatically. The Rogue King studied the map spread before them, his expression grim. Not against 3-to-1 odds. We're strong but we're not miracle workers. If they commit to this assault, we'll lose. Unless we even the odds, she said, an idea forming. Everyone turned to look at her. I can sense pack bonds from miles away now, she explained. Which means I can identify which wolves are truly loyal to my father versus which ones are just following orders out of duty or fear. If I can reach those wolves before the battle, show them that I'm alive, that I'm powerful, that my father lied about everything, some of them might defect. That's a massive assumption, the beta said skeptically. It's better than facing 300 warriors with only 100 rogues, she countered. Give me a strike team. Let me try to fracture their alliance before they reach our territory. The Rogue King was already shaking his head. Absolutely not. You'll be walking into enemy territory, directly into your father's line of fire. I'm the only one who can do this, she interrupted. My lunar-born abilities, my connection to Ironwood Pack's members, my knowledge of how my father operates, no one else has those advantages. And if you're captured? If he kills you? She met his eyes steadily, feeling the mate bond pulse between them. Then you burn Ironwood to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. We agreed on that, remember? That was before he stopped himself, but she felt the emotion through the bond anyway. Before I realized how much I love you. Before losing you became unthinkable. I know, she said softly. But we're out of options. Either I go and try to turn some of his forces, or we fight a battle we'll definitely lose. The council argued for another hour, but eventually the logic became unavoidable. They needed to fracture the alliance, and she was their best weapon for doing so. She left at dawn with a strike team of 8 elite rogues, moving fast and quiet through neutral territory toward the convergence point where Ironwood's forces were gathering. The Rogue King hadn't wanted to let her go, had literally tried to block the door until she'd reminded him that she wasn't his prisoner or his property but his mate and equal partner. He'd yielded, but the look in his eyes had made her promise to come back alive. She intended to keep that promise. It took 3 days of forced march to reach the staging area where Ironwood, Nightshade, and Crescent Moon forces were preparing their assault. She could sense the pack bonds from 2 miles out, hundreds of threads connecting warriors to their respective alphas, some strong and bright with loyalty, others frayed and dim with doubt or fear. Those frayed bonds were her targets. I'm going in alone, she told the strike team. If this goes wrong, you retreat immediately and warn the king. Don't try to rescue me, just make sure he knows what happened. He'll kill us if we abandon you, one of the warriors muttered. He'll understand tactical necessity, she corrected, hoping it was true. She approached the camp perimeter just after nightfall, when guards were changing shifts and attention was divided. Her lunar-born abilities allowed her to move like a shadow, dampening her scent and presence until she was practically invisible to normal wolf senses. She found her first target, a young warrior whose bond to Ironwood Pack was barely holding together, frayed by years of watching her father's cruelty and questioning orders. She materialized beside him in the darkness, silver light flickering just enough to be seen. Don't scream, she whispered. I'm not here to hurt you. The warrior spun, weapon half drawn, then froze when he recognized her face. You're the Alpha's daughter. Was his daughter, she corrected. Now I'm something much more dangerous. She let the silver light pulse brighter, demonstrating power that no ordinary wolf possessed. I'm lunar-born. The bloodline your Alpha tried to suppress and hide because he feared what I might become. That's impossible. Is it? Look at me. Really look. She held his gaze, letting him see the truth. I'm exactly what the old stories described. And I'm here to offer you a choice. Over the next 3 hours, she moved through the camp like a ghost, finding warriors whose bonds were weak enough to be questioned. She showed them what she was, explained what her father had done, offered them a simple choice: continue following an alpha who lied and suppressed power out of fear, or join the rogues and fight for something better. By dawn, 47 warriors had defected. It wasn't enough to stop the assault entirely, but it was enough to create chaos. 47 sudden desertions, all telling the same story about Ironwood's daughter being alive and powerful and offering sanctuary to anyone who questioned their alpha's authority. The alliance fractured immediately. Nightshade and Crescent Moon alphas demanded to know why Ironwood hadn't disclosed that his supposedly dead daughter was actually lunar-born and mated to the Rogue King. Accusations of deception flew. Trust evaporated. By the time she slipped back out of the camp with her strike team and the defectors, the three-pack alliance was falling apart. She felt her father's rage through the distant connection she still had to Ironwood Pack, a burning fury that made her smile grimly. He'd thought he could crush the rogues through overwhelming force. Instead, he'd lost nearly 50 warriors and his allies' trust in a single night. The Rogue King met her at the border, his relief crashing through their bond so powerfully it nearly buckled her knees. He pulled her into his arms without words, just holding her tight enough to hurt while his wolf verified she was alive and whole. Never again, he growled against her hair. Never send you into enemy territory alone again. It worked, she pointed out. I don't care. My heart can't take it. She smiled against his chest, feeling the mate bonds sing with his love and terror and overwhelming relief. The assault? She asked. Delayed, possibly cancelled. Nightshade pulled their forces when they learned about you. Crescent Moon is demanding a neutral mediator to verify Ironwood's claims. Your father's scrambling to hold the alliance together, but from what our scouts report, it's falling apart. Good. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But he won't stop. He'll regroup, find new allies, come at us differently. Then we'll be ready. The Rogue King's expression turned predatory. And eventually, we'll take the fight to him. End this once and for all. She felt anticipation stir in her chest, not fear, but eagerness. Her father had controlled her through powerlessness for 20 years. Now she was powerful enough to face him as an equal. And when that confrontation finally came, he would understand exactly what he'd thrown away when he'd sent his daughter to die in rogue territory. The confrontation came 3 months later, but not in the way anyone expected. Her father didn't send an army. He came alone, requesting safe passage into rogue territory under a white flag of truce for a private conversation with his daughter. The request was so unprecedented that the entire rogue council spent an hour debating whether it was a trap. Eventually, they agreed to allow it under strict conditions. The meeting would take place in neutral ground with witnesses from both sides, and any sign of treachery would result in immediate execution. Alpha Matthias agreed to all terms. She stood in the clearing where she'd rejected her father's delegation months ago, and watched him approach with emotions she couldn't quite name. He looked older than she remembered, gray threading through his dark hair, new lines carved into his face by stress or age or both. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, missing any warmth that should exist when a father looks at his child. You've changed, he said by way of greeting, his gaze taking in her confident stance and the silver light that pulsed faintly beneath her skin. You tried to have me killed, she replied flatly. That tends to be transformative. I sent you into neutral territory on a diplomatic mission. You sent me into rogue territory knowing exactly what would happen, she interrupted. Don't insult us both by pretending otherwise. You wanted the Rogue King to execute me so you wouldn't have to explain to the pack why their alpha's daughter was actually lunar-born. Something flickered in his expression, not quite guilt, but acknowledgement. Your mother, he said after a long pause. She was lunar-born. I didn't know when I claimed her as my mate. By the time I discovered the truth, you'd already been conceived. The revelation hit like a physical blow. You knew. The entire time, you knew what I was. I knew what you could become, he corrected. Which is why I had her power suppressed after your birth, had the pack healers seal your abilities, told everyone you were human. I thought if I could keep you powerless, you'd be safe. Safe? The word came out sharp as broken glass. You made me feel worthless for 20 years. Made me believe I was a disappointment, a failure, not good enough to be your daughter. You call that keeping me safe? I call it keeping you alive. His composure cracked for the first time, anger bleeding through. Do you have any idea what would have happened if the other packs discovered I'd made it a lunar-born? If they knew you carried that bloodline? They would have demanded your execution. I would have lost my position, possibly my pack. Everything I built would have been destroyed. So you destroyed me instead, she said quietly. Piece by piece, year by year, until I was so convinced I was nothing that I didn't question it. I protected you. You protected yourself. The silver light exploded around her, making every wolf in the clearing step back. You suppressed my power because it threatened your authority. You made me invisible because acknowledging me was inconvenient. And when I started to awaken despite the suppression, you sent me away to die rather than deal with the consequences of your lies. Alpha Matthias stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You're right, he said finally, and the admission seemed to cost him. I was afraid. Of your power, of what it meant, of losing control. I made choices that prioritized my position over your well-being. And he stopped, struggling with words she'd never heard from him before. I'm sorry. The apology landed between them like a stone in still water. The rogue king, standing at her side, radiated protective fury through their bond. She could feel his wolf demanding she reject the apology, that she make her father pay for every year of suffering he'd caused. But she'd learned something in her months with the rogues. Revenge felt good in the moment but didn't heal the damage underneath. I don't forgive you, she said clearly. I don't know if I ever will. But I understand that you made choices based on fear, and those choices destroyed any chance we had at a real relationship. I know. Her father's voice was rough. Which is why I'm here to offer you something I should have given you 20 years ago, choice. He pulled a scroll from his jacket and held it out. This document legally separates you from Ironwood Pack. No claim on you, no authority over you, no obligation or loyalty expected. You're free to live as lunar-born, to embrace your power, to build whatever life you want with the Rogue King. She took the scroll with trembling hands, unrolling it to find exactly what he described, a formal separation agreement that would sever all ties between her and the pack she'd grown up in. Why? She asked. Because keeping you tied to Ironwood was my mistake, not yours. Because you deserve the freedom I never gave you. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something that might have been genuine regret. And because even a bastard like me can recognize when he's lost his daughter through his own cruelty. She looked down at the document, at the signatures already in place from pack witnesses and council members. All it needed was her mark to become official. If I sign this, she said slowly, what happens to the blood feud? To the war between Ironwood and the rogue clans? I'm proposing a truce, her father said, and she heard the rogue king's low growl of surprise. Non-aggression pact between our forces. I leave the rogues alone, the rogues leave Ironwood alone. No raids, no retaliation, no continuing the cycle that cost us both too much already. The rogue king stepped forward, his dominance radiating. You slaughtered my family. Burned my pack house. Killed civilians and children. And you think I'll just forgive that because you're offering a piece of paper? I think, Alpha Matthias said carefully, that continuing to fight over old wounds will cost you the mate you just claimed and me the daughter I just lost. I think we're both tired of bleeding. And I think, he paused, something almost human crossing his features, that my daughter deserves peace more than either of us deserves revenge. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. She looked at the rogue king, feeling his conflict through the bond. His wolf wanted blood, wanted justice for his slaughtered family. But his human side recognized the pragmatism. A truce would allow them to build without constantly watching their backs for Ironwood retaliation. It's your choice, he said to her, not her father. Whatever you decide, I'll support. She looked down at the separation agreement, at the freedom being offered after 20 years of captivity. Then she looked at her father, the male who'd suppressed her power, made her feel worthless, sent her to die, and was now, finally, giving her the choice he should have offered from the beginning. I'll sign, she said. On one condition. Name it. You tell the truth. To Ironwood Pack, to the Allied territories, to everyone. You admit that I'm lunar born, that you suppressed my power out of fear, that the bloodline isn't extinct. No more lies. No more hiding what I am. Her father's jaw tightened. That will cost me politically, I don't care. She let the silver light pulse. You want peace? You want a truce? Then you pay for it by giving me the one thing you never did, public acknowledgement of what I am and what you did. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded slowly. Agreed. I'll make the announcement within the week. She signed the separation agreement with a silver pen one of the rogues provided, her signature glowing faintly with lunar-born power before settling into ordinary ink. The moment it was done, she felt something shift, the last threads connecting her to Ironwood Pact dissolving, leaving her truly free for the first time in her life. Her father rolled up the document and tucked it away. For what it's worth, he said quietly, your mother would be proud of what you've become. She always said lunar-born were meant to heal, not harm. You're proving her right. The mention of her mother made her chest tighten. I wish I'd known her. She was remarkable. Powerful and kind in equal measure. You have her eyes. He paused. And her strength. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever received from him. He left shortly after, escorted back to the border by neutral wolves, and she stood in the clearing feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than before. You gave him mercy, the rogue king said, pulling her close. More than he deserved. I gave myself freedom, she corrected. The mercy was just a side effect. He kissed her, pouring love and pride and absolute devotion through the bond, and she felt the last piece of her damaged heart click into place. She wasn't Ironwood's shame anymore. Wasn't the rogue king's forbidden claim. She was simply herself, lunar-born, powerful, free, and exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months after the truce, she stood in the central gathering space of the rogue territory and addressed the assembled clans with silver light pulsing around her like a crown. When I first came here, she said, her voice carrying to every wolf present, I was running from a father who wanted me dead and bound to a mate who rejected our connection. I had no idea what I was, no understanding of my power, no hope for anything beyond survival. The rogues listened in absolute silence, their attention fixed on their Luna. But you gave me space to discover what I could become. You gave me teachers who didn't fear my abilities. You gave me a mate who chose me despite every logical reason not to. And you gave me a purpose worth fighting for. She let the silver light expand, touching each pack bond in the gathering, strengthening them, healing the damage that years of exile and trauma had inflicted. The lunar-born were hunted to extinction because wolves feared what we could do. Because a few tyrants used their power to enslave instead of serve. But I want to show you, show the entire world, what lunar-born power is meant for. She raised her hands and channeled everything she'd learned over the past year. The silver light erupted from her in waves that washed over every rogue present, and she felt their bonds strengthen, their wounds begin to heal, their connection to each other and to the clan solidify into something unbreakable. Wolves gasped as old injuries closed, as psychological damage from rejection and exile eased, as the pack bonds that had been frayed or broken were woven back together into brilliant, strong threads of connection. When the light finally faded, she stood exhausted but triumphant in the center of a clan that was stronger, healthier, more unified than they'd been in decades. The rogue king moved to her side immediately, catching her before her knees could buckle. That was reckless, he murmured against her hair. That was necessary, she corrected. They needed to see what I could really do. What lunar-born power is meant to accomplish. You're going to burn yourself out showing off. Then it's good I have a mate who can stop me. He smiled against her temple, and she felt his love and exasperation in equal measure through the bond. Over the following weeks, word of what had happened spread across the territories. The Lunar-born weren't extinct. One survived, mated to the Rogue King, using her abilities to heal instead of harm. Other packs began to reach out, requesting her help with damaged bonds or feral wolves. Some came offering alliance. Others came seeking refuge from packs that had grown too cruel or controlling. The rogue clans swelled with new members. All of them drawn by the promise of a Luna who could heal their deepest wounds and an Alpha who protected the broken instead of exploiting them. Her father kept his word. Within 3 weeks of their meeting, he'd made a public announcement confirming that his daughter was Lunar-born, that he'd suppressed her abilities, that the bloodline wasn't extinct. The political fallout was immediate and brutal. Several allied packs severed ties with Ironwood, questioning what else Alpha Matthias had lied about. She watched his authority crumble from a distance and felt nothing but a distant satisfaction. He'd made his choices. Now he was living with the consequences. One evening, as she and the Rogue King sat together watching the sunset over their territory, he asked the question she'd been waiting for. "Do you regret any of it? The bond, the power, the path that brought you here?" She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, powerless, invisible, convinced she was worthless. Then she thought about who she was now, Lunar-born, mated, powerful enough to reshape entire packs through her abilities alone. "Not even for a second," she said. "This bond, this life, it's everything I never knew I needed." He pulled her closer, his arm around her waist, possessive and protective. "Your father sent you here to die. Instead, you became the most important wolf in the Northern Territories. Cosmic justice at its finest. Or fate," he suggested. "The moon goddess giving us both exactly what we needed, even if we were too stubborn to see it at first." She leaned into him, feeling the mate bond pulse with perfect contentment. "I'm glad your wolf was smarter than your human consciousness." "My wolf is a genius," he agreed. "It recognized you immediately. Knew you were worth fighting for. And now? Now I can't imagine existence without you." He turned her to face him, his golden eyes serious. "You're my mate, my Luna, my equal in every way that matters. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the gift the moon goddess gave me when she bound us together." She kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and devotion through the bond, and felt his response echo back tenfold. They'd started as enemies, forbidden, impossible, destined to destroy each other. Instead, they'd built something that neither could have achieved alone, a sanctuary for broken wolves, a demonstration that power could be used to heal, and proof that the mate bond was stronger than blood feuds or ancient grudges. The silver light pulsed beneath her skin in agreement. She was Lunar-born. She was the Rogue King's mate. She was free. And the future stretched before them like an open road, full of challenges and possibilities and the absolute certainty that they would face everything together. Her father had sent her to die in rogue territory. Instead, she'd found her destiny. The Rogue King claimed his forbidden mate, and their bond changed the entire region. But when other packs discover that Lunar-born abilities can heal what was thought permanent, the real battle for her power is just beginning. Subscribe to see what happens when the world realizes she's not just surviving, she's thriving, and rewriting every rule they thought they knew.